You're sitting in your car outside a grocery store staring at your banking app before you go in. The engine's still running because the battery's been acting weird lately, and you're afraid if you turn it off, it won't start again. You already moved $47 from savings to checking this morning just so your insurance auto pay wouldn't bounce. Then your phone lights up with a text from a friend asking if you want to grab dinner Friday, and before you even open it, you're already rehearsing excuses. The strange part is this car was supposed to make your life easier. So why does it feel like you work for it instead? Because the payments never really stop. Even after the monthly bill, there's gas, tires, registration, parking tickets you forgot about until the late fee doubled. The check engine light comes on and suddenly your entire week changes shape around it. You tell yourself you'll wait until next paycheck. Then next paycheck arrives already claimed by things that felt urgent 3 days ago and invisible 3 months ago, so you start making tiny adjustments everywhere else. You skip adding chicken to the salad because it's $6 more. You leave items in your online cart for later, like that counts as restraint instead of exhaustion. You stay at a job you hate because missing even one paycheck would turn your entire financial life into wet cement, and the worst part is the car often doesn't feel optional anymore. It feels like the thing holding the whole structure together, which is exactly why escaping the cycle feels impossible. Most financial advice handles this badly. It says things like, just buy a cheaper car, or cars are liabilities, which technically isn't wrong but also doesn't help when your job is 28 minutes away, and public transit looks like a punishment designed by someone who hates mornings. But the real problem usually isn't the car itself. It's what the car quietly forces the rest of your life to become. That's the part almost nobody talks about. And once you see it, you start realizing why two people with nearly identical salaries can end up living completely different financial lives just because one monthly payment changed the gravity of everything around them. Federal Reserve data shows the average monthly car payment in America reached $738 for new vehicles in 2025, while used car payments averaged $532. But those numbers are weirdly deceptive because your payment is never just your payment. It drags a whole ecosystem behind it. Higher insurance, more expensive housing because you need parking, longer commutes because you can technically live farther away now. More takeout because you're too drained to cook after driving an hour home through traffic. It's like pushing a boulder uphill that secretly gets heavier every month, and you feel that weight constantly. You feel it when you say no to a weekend trip that would have cost less than your brake repair. You feel it when you hesitate before applying for a lower-paying job you'd actually enjoy. Sound familiar? But here's where it gets really interesting. According to AAA, the average total cost of owning and operating a new vehicle exceeded $12,297 per year once fuel, maintenance, insurance, depreciation, and financing were included. That's over $1,000, $24,000, $4,000 for every month. Not for luxury, not for status, just for transportation. Read that again. Now think about someone earning $58,000 a year after taxes. Over 20% of their take-home pay disappears before they even arrive anywhere, and because those costs arrive in smaller pieces, your brain rarely experiences them as one giant expense. Psychologists call this mental accounting, the tendency to separate cost into tiny emotional buckets instead of seeing the whole picture. Which is why a $680 car payment feels manageable right up until the transmission dies and suddenly your manageable life collapses in one afternoon. Think about the last time your car needed unexpected work. Your entire mood changed instantly, not because the repair happened, because your margin disappeared. Now here's the part that will blow your mind. The real damage isn't always financial, it's cognitive. Researchers at Princeton found that financial stress can temporarily reduce cognitive performance by the equivalent of losing 13 IQ points. That's not because poor people are less intelligent. It's because scarcity consumes mental bandwidth the same way too many browser tabs slow down a computer. And cars are one of the biggest bandwidth thieves in modern life. You're constantly calculating. Can I afford gas before payday? Should I replace all 4 tires or just the front 2? What happens if insurance renews higher next month? Every tiny decision burns energy. Every delayed repair becomes background anxiety humming under your entire day like an air conditioner you can't turn off. You probably know someone who seems permanently tired despite making decent money. Sometimes it's not their income, it's the infrastructure surrounding their life. But here's something most people completely miss. Cars don't just cost money. They quietly shape your future decisions. A study from the Urban Institute found that households with heavy transportation costs were significantly less likely to build emergency savings or invest consistently. Which makes sense when you think about how monthly obligations change behavior. The moment your fixed expenses rise, your tolerance for risk shrinks. So you stay longer in bad situations. You don't start the business. You don't move cities. You don't take the temporary pay cut that could have led somewhere better. Your car payment becomes this invisible manager supervising every major choice you make. And this took me a while to accept personally because we're taught to think of cars as freedom. I genuinely believed that for years. But eventually I realized a lot of people aren't driving freedom, they're financing immobility. Here's what actually happens. You buy a slightly nicer car because the payment difference is only $140 more per month. Then insurance rises another $89. Premium gas adds another $41. The nicer neighborhood apartment with safer parking costs another $312. Suddenly your life requires an extra $9,000 a year just to maintain itself at baseline. The car changed your floor, and once your floor rises, everything gets tighter. The mortgage sets your floor. The neighborhood sets your pressure. The car sets your flexibility. Thomas Stanley, the researcher behind The Millionaire Next Door, spent decades studying wealthy Americans and found something almost embarrassingly simple. Many millionaires drove used cars for years longer than their income technically required. Not because they loved deprivation, because they protected flexibility obsessively. Meanwhile, households earning over $150,000 were often financially fragile specifically because they scaled lifestyle costs too quickly. The income looked rich, the obligations looked richer. And this is where things get really practical. Take two real people. Ronald Rudd was a gas station attendant and janitor from Vermont, who wore flannel shirts, drove used Toyotas, and lived so modestly neighbors barely noticed him. He died with an $8 million fortune after decades of consistent investing. Then there's Michael Carroll, a former garbage collector in the United Kingdom who won £9.7 million in the lottery at 19, bought luxury cars almost immediately, and went bankrupt within years. Different incomes, different outcomes. But the deeper difference was infrastructure. One built a life that stayed light. The other built a life that demanded constant feeding. You can actually feel this difference in daily life. The person with lower fixed costs sleeps differently. They negotiate differently. They recover from setbacks faster because every mistake doesn't trigger a financial avalanche. Now let's talk about something that will probably surprise you. Depreciation matters less than timing. Everybody talks about how cars lose value, which they do, but the really dangerous moment is when a car payment overlaps with other adult milestones. Marriage, kids, rent increases, medical bills. That's when people get trapped. According to Experian, the average new car loan term climbed past 68 months. Think about that. Nearly 6 years. 6 years is enough time for your entire life to change twice. You buy the car as one version of yourself and repay it as someone completely different. Maybe you're suddenly supporting parents. Maybe daycare enters the picture. Maybe layoffs hit your industry. But the payment survives all of it like a subscription distress you forgot how to cancel. But here's the part nobody talks about. A lot of car purchases are really emotional purchases disguised as practical ones. This is what behavioral economists call hedonic adaptation. The excitement spike fades faster than your financial obligation does, which is why the new car smell disappears in 3 weeks while the payment stays for 6 years. And you can watch this happen in real time. Someone buys the car they deserve, feels incredible for maybe 2 months, then adapts completely. Soon the leather seats feel normal. The giant touchscreen feels expected. The only thing that still feels emotionally real is the payment leaving the account every month. That's the cruel asymmetry. The pleasure shrinks, the obligation doesn't. Here's what actually happens. The car becomes part of your identity. And once something becomes identity, downgrading feels humiliating instead of intelligent. You see this constantly online. People making $62,000 financing vehicles that cost nearly their annual income because somewhere along the way the car stopped being transportation and became proof. Proof they were succeeding. Proof they escaped struggle. Proof they mattered. But proof is expensive. And the strange thing is genuinely wealthy people often stop caring about visible proof altogether. Researchers call this counter-signaling, when people with actual status feel less need to advertise it publicly. That's why the richest person in a parking lot is sometimes driving the most forgettable vehicle there. Think about someone in your life who always seems financially calm. Odds are they don't have the flashiest anything. They just have space. Space in their schedule. Space in their budget. Space between emergencies and disaster. That space changes everything. But here's where it gets really interesting. Transportation costs don't just affect money, they affect geography. According to Harvard's Joint Center for Housing Studies, many Americans move farther from city centers specifically to offset housing costs, but the transportation expenses often erase much of the savings. You save $430 on rent, then spend $380 more on commuting, maintenance, and fuel, while losing 11 hours a week sitting in traffic. So now you're poorer and more exhausted, and exhaustion is financially dangerous. Tired people spend differently. They order delivery more often. They avoid price comparisons. They choose convenience because their brain has nothing left. Your car could break down. Your laptop might die. You could lose your job. When your financial system already runs hot, even tiny disruptions feel catastrophic. And this is where things get really practical. The goal isn't necessarily to never own a car. That's unrealistic for a lot of people, especially in places built entirely around driving. The goal is reducing how much of your future the car is allowed to consume. Maybe that means keeping your current car 3 extra years after it's paid off. Maybe it means buying reliable instead of impressive. Maybe it means refusing to normalize a payment so large it controls your emotional life. Those sound like small decisions. They aren't. Vanguard's long-term investment research found that consistent investing behavior mattered more than chasing high returns. Which means the person freeing up even $340 monthly for years often outruns someone earning more but carrying heavier obligations. Compounding doesn't just work on investments, it works on pressure too. A small monthly burden repeated for years becomes structural, just like a small monthly surplus repeated for years becomes freedom. The obvious pushback here is that some people genuinely need a car, and that's true. If you live somewhere without reliable public transit, work irregular hours, have kids, care for family members, or commute long distances, this isn't about pretending transportation is optional. It isn't. But the starting point doesn't have to be dramatic. You don't need to sell everything tomorrow and ride a bicycle through the rain like a finance monk. Sometimes the first move is just keeping the paid-off car longer than your ego wants to. Sometimes it's calculating the true monthly ownership cost honestly for the first time. Sometimes it's realizing the goal isn't looking successful for 6 months. It's becoming financially difficult to break for 30 years. Because the deepest shift isn't really about cars at all. It's about understanding that every recurring expense becomes a vote for the kind of life you're allowed to build. That's the layer underneath everything. A huge car payment doesn't just take money from you. It takes optionality. It takes recovery time. It takes the ability to absorb uncertainty without panic. And most people never notice this because the loss happens slowly, quietly. Like water leaking from a cracked bucket, one drop at a time. The truly wealthy feeling most people are chasing isn't luxury, it's slack. It's waking up knowing one bad month won't destroy you. It's being able to leave a toxic job without calculating gas prices first. It's hearing a strange sound from your car and not feeling your stomach physically tighten. That's why some people making modest income seem calm while higher earners look permanently cornered. One person built a life with breathing room. The other built a life that requires constant performance just to stay standing. And once you understand that, you stop seeing money as a scorecard and start seeing it as structural engineering. You start noticing who's carrying weight and who's carrying freedom. You stop confusing expensive with successful. You stop admiring lifestyles that can only survive under perfect conditions. And quietly, almost without realizing it, you become the kind of person who would rather own their future than impress strangers at a stoplight.